You've just joined the Prepper Broadcasting Network, where we promote self-reliance and independence. The views and opinions expressed are strictly those of the host or their guests. Visit us in the interactive chat room at prepperbroadcasting.com.
Bankland, Federation of Bankland, the Republic of Bankland, United States of Bankland, United Kingdom of Bankland. Parasite, a smart parasite, a real smart parasite. Keeps its host alive. Times are bad and times are hard, and minus cash my way is barred and treated like some retard strapped to a suicide credit card. Mr. Banker, can't you see?
Welcome, Gold Strikers. This is our weekly libertarian talk show where we discuss not just the problems of today, but also solutions to those problems. If you have any questions or comments during tonight's broadcast, the call-in number to get on the air is 1-347-202-0228. After you've connected, remember to press 1 so that our producer will see you want to be on the air. If you're listening to this show on Blog Talk or any other website that carries the player, you can also listen and join us in the chat room at prepperbroadcasting.com. About halfway down the page, you'll see a player button. Click that. Below that, you'll see the chat room. Enter your username and click connect. You can answer questions in the chat room as well. Our guest tonight is GlennDarrin Stewart, calling from Norway. GlennDarrin grew up in the streets of several cities in England and Europe. The son of an alcoholic and substance abuser, GlennDarrin knew how to fight and get drunk by the age of 13. One day, after having a bad dream of the world ending, he found an interest in prepping and moved to Oslo, Norway. Unable to get a job while begging for food, he met an unemployed journalist who helped him to start what's called a street magazine titled Oslo. He started interviewing alcoholics, drug addicts, and rejected social groups, and then started employing people on the streets to sell the magazine, and within 6 weeks sold 70,000 copies. The magazine is now very successful and even endorsed by the Norwegian government. Welcome to the show, GlennDarrin. How are you doing?
No, I'm very well, thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming on the air. I think this is a really great topic to kick off this series of shows. We're going to be doing a series of shows about entrepreneurship and success, and people bringing on people such as yourself that have started out from the bottom and worked your way up to a top with successful businesses. And I think this topic is really interesting because you literally did start at the very bottom. So to get into the show, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you started out living in the streets, how you were able to survive?
Well, it's quite a long story, but I guess I can get a few major points put in there. I didn't actually end up on the streets. I was actually raised on the streets. Most of my youth, my first memories were hanging out outside of pubs, waiting around, trying to get money, trying to find food, just trying to survive, just get by, trying to hide, stay away from the lunatic parents that I had, just trying to live life normally. Yeah, and that didn't really happen, I'm afraid. So by the time I was, let's say, 10 and a half, I'd started trying to escape from my parents, running away, disappearing. Nobody really noticed anyway. So it was a bit of an exceptional upbringing. I missed out on all the school opportunities. There was no education possibilities. And it turns out that when I was about 11 years old, that I was arrested by the police. I'd run away to England. And it turns out I wasn't even registered as a child. My parents had never registered me. I didn't exist.
So you really were starting out all by yourself from the very beginning. From the very beginning as a child, you were pretty much alone.
Oh, yes, constantly. But it's still a feeling that sticks with me today, that I'm kind of outside of society due to the fact that I didn't get as... I class myself as lucky in a way because I wasn't indoctrinated in the same way as most people who go through the school systems were.
Uh-huh.
So I questioned almost everything. I wasn't just regurgitating, as they say.
So how are you able to get the education that you did have, as far as learning to speak, and were you able to learn to write and read or any of that sort of education living like that?
Well, counting and doing sums and basic mathematics, I actually learnt from being in a pub. And if I was a scorer for the people who played darts. So I can count backwards better than I can count forwards. So and if I made a mistake, they'd throw a dart at me. So I learnt very quickly to do subtraction. But as far as learning how to read, I think it kind of just came bit by bit. But I was still very... I was pretty illiterate when I was 13 years old still. I couldn't read properly. I couldn't really read books, and it was very difficult. But I solved that problem after I'd run away for the last time. I ran away when I was 12 and a half years old. By the time I was 13, I was actually living alone on the streets of London, which was pretty scary at 13 years old, realising that the only person in the world you've got to rely on is yourself.
So being out on your alone like that, what were you doing for shelter and what were you doing for food?
Well, this was the 70s, don't forget. So at that time, there was quite a big punk movement in the UK. So, and they'd bum out in empty houses, they'd occupy houses. There'd be a lot of squats. And at that specific time in the 70s, there was about 75,000 homeless teenagers on the streets of London.
So just doing pretty much whatever you could to get by.
Well,
so
kind of. Go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead.
Well, most of the teenagers on the streets at that time were doing a lot of drugs. There was a lot of heavy drugs. Heroin was a big problem on the streets. But luckily enough, I was raised around it. So I kind of understood from an early age that drugs is not the way to go. But it was kind of socially acceptable to drink. So I did. I drank quite a lot. A lot of the teenagers were selling themselves on the streets. They were doing drug running. They were prostituting. But one day I kind of thought, I've got to find another way to do this because I don't want to get arrested. If I get arrested, then I'm back into the system and I'm back into some kind of foster home or something. So I just came up with an idea. I just went up to a door one day and I knocked on the door, not having a clue what I was going to say. And this old lady opened the door, and I kind of bullshitted her a little bit. I said, "Look, I've just moved in round the corner. Do you have any old books you've read? I've got nothing to read, and this, that, the other, and this, that, the other." And she said, "Oh yes, wait a minute." And she gave me a whole bag of books, and she'd read most of them. And I thought, okay, well, I've got a bag of books here. So I went to the next house and I knocked on the door, and an old man opened the door. And I gave him the bag and said, "Here, look, here's a bag of books. Just give me a couple of quid." So I kind of went from house to house doing that. And I was making more money than the drug dealers were. I was making more money than the prostitutes did. When you're doing this 8 hours a day, knocking on one door,
just basically selling books. You're brokering books.
Yep, basically.
Well,
you have to be creative to survive.
Experienced at entrepreneurship, then.
Yeah, I guess so. It was an interesting time, I must admit. I mean, London's such a huge city. You know, you could travel through London, meet somebody, and never meet them again for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But when I became a bit of a celebrity in the area because people kind of knew me, and then about when I was about 14, my first job came along. So I took a job on a travelling fairground, a carney, I think you call them.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was travelling the whole of the UK, just living in a Volvo F10 truck, so in the little cab there, and that was kind of my home for the next 2 years.
So what led you up to, you said you met an unemployed journalist who gave you the idea for doing a magazine.
Well, I'd seen street magazines from the 90s, actually. They started in London in 92, 93. But I never really paid much attention because at the time I was still kind of a raging alcoholic. I didn't really see much. I didn't really pay attention to much. It was more about finding money for alcohol. And the alcohol had actually taken very much over. It was, and then I had my dream. That was a life-turning moment for me. So.
And that's what got you interested in moving up to Norway?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to get out the way. I wanted to get out the way. It was I needed to clear myself out, stop drinking. My dream wasn't really much about an apocalyptic world, as it was the after effects of the people suffering, the people who were hungry, the things people do sometimes when situations get bad around them, how violence becomes a part of the daily life, and I wasn't really sure why I'd had this dream. It was a bit of a wake up call for me because when you're drinking, you kind of pass out more than anything else.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of people, I was going to say, I think a lot of people have similar, I guess you want to call them awakenings that get them interested in being prepared.
Yes, yeah. Yes, indeed. So, like I say, I moved to Oslo, and I started living on the streets of Oslo. You know, the streets are the same no matter where you go. It's just a different country with a different language. And after living in Germany for a few years, and Holland for a few years, and France for a few years, I thought it'd be nice to learn another language. I thought, okay, Oslo's pretty far out the way, so I'll go and try that. I lived in Sweden for a couple of years as well before that.
So was it in Norway that you met the journalist?
Yes, it was. I was living on the streets of Oslo, trying to get a job. There wasn't much about, some small jobs here and there, but I wanted something more permanent, and I wanted something that suited me more. So I thought one day, okay, well, why don't we have a street magazine here in Norway? So I started looking into it.
Oh, I want to go back just a little bit. We had one of the guests in the chat room. They want to know what the dream was about. You want to provide a little bit of detail about the dream?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
It was the dream was more about people who were suffering, seeing the desperation on their faces and the fear of uncertainty. I think that's what did it. It wasn't, a picture of a burning city or, a total collapse in society. It was more of the struggling. People were starving to death. So that shocked me very much.
So having that dream, that's what basically made you think, hey, you got to get away, look for a better life, a better place, and get away from the big city, and that's what drove you to go to Norway.
Yes, it was. That's life in the cities can be pretty rough, but once you started living outside for a while, you start using the city to make money, and then you disappear back into the forests to live to your campsites. Yes. So, I've always had a little bag with me ever since I can remember that had an extra change of clothes, a little bit of food in it. So I've kind of had a bug out bag, for the past 50 years.
So you got the bug out bag and been studying and following up on prepping and know how to survive.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I think you were saying, I think was it you I was speaking with about food storage.
Yes.
In Norway.
Yes. Well, food storage in Norway is a practical impossibility. This country is not set up, and the average Norwegian lives in total denial that anything can go wrong. They have so much faith in their government, and I think that's a result of the oil money that there is here in Norway. There is a lot of oil money. So, but then again, on the other side, it's also a very expensive country to live in. Very much so. You know, if you want to buy a frozen pizza for your family, you're going to pay $65.
Wow.
Yeah, tell me about it. It's ridiculous.
So how do people make it up there? How do they make a living if it's so expensive?
Well, we're paid pretty well. We do get very well paid. I mean, there isn't many people who don't make a six-figure sum. That's the normal in Norway. So, but I mean, the average working guy, people like painters, builders, you know, they're charging, at least up to $100, $130 an hour. So they get pretty well paid.
Yeah,
but then
one
again,
of our chat room comments are $65 for a pizza.
Yep.
Wow.
Frozen pizza as well.
Frozen.
You know, if you want to buy a fresh one, you want to get one delivered to your door, you're going to pay about 700-800 kroners, which is in the region of $70, $75, maybe $80. And that's not even a super big pizza. That's just enough to feed a small family.
Wow. So so let's get into the magazine. How you met the journalist, and you said you had a talk with this journalist that got you interested in doing the street magazines.
Yes.
Oh, could you give our listeners a little bit of an idea of what a street magazine is versus a normal magazine that they see on the shelves in the stores? What's the difference? What is a street magazine?
Well, as the name implicates, you cannot buy a street magazine in a shop. You have to buy it off what we call a vendor, somebody who stands on a street corner or a shopping centre and sells the magazine from there. And it's what we call social entrepreneurship, where there's no one person, one owner behind the magazine. It's a collective between the people who sell the magazine and the people who run the magazine. And all the money is shared out equally. Every month they get a share of the magazines in free magazines, so that when the new month starts, they have a little bit of start capital to start their month with. And most of the profits from the magazine go into a foundation to start the new magazines, so that every month we have a new income coming in and we have a new theme in the magazines. So it's quite an interesting subject, but how it all comes together. It is social entrepreneurship at its best, actually.
So I don't think I've ever seen, when you're talking about street magazines, but of course I don't live in a city, and I don't wander around in any big cities. I imagine there's some here in the States, but I haven't seen, magazines that you can't buy in the store. I'm just used to seeing magazines in the store.
Absolutely.
I'm not familiar with the street magazine concept. So how did? What's that? Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. It's just that the street magazines are designed specifically to be sold on the street. It's you can choose who it is that you want to support. Because half of the cover price of the magazine goes to the guy who's selling it to you, or the girl who is selling it to you. So as an example of this, if let's say, for example, the magazine costs $10 on the street as a street price, then $5 of that goes to the guy who is selling. Maybe $2 goes towards the cost of the actual production of the magazine, and $3 goes into the kitty from of the actual profits for the magazine to pay for the chief editors, to pay for the photographers, and we have many. A lot of it is built upon voluntary work. A lot of the journalists can actually get published through us. A lot of people who want to write books test run their books through the magazines. We interview most of the people on the streets, and nearly all of our sellers have actually, been in the magazine as well. Their life stories.
So how does the content? So you're mentioning that a lot of the writers and photographers are, doing this as volunteer work to get their name out there and get the experience. But how does the content differ in a street magazine versus a magazine that's commercially produced and sold in the stores? What kind of different content could people find in a street magazine?
Well, we generally work off themes. We pick a theme for a year, and we go, okay, well this month we'll talk about education, and we'll interview the people who are actually in education, those who are not in education, those who want to be in education, and we basically just go after different themes. So that throughout the course of a year we have 12 different subjects. So we don't stick to daily news. I don't know if you know yourself, but daily newspapers, by the time you actually read it, it's already out of date.
Yes. So this type of magazine, okay, so when I'm thinking of a magazine like, like Time Magazine or, some of the big popular magazines here in the States, those are mostly focused on politics and news, almost like I want to think of like a monthly newspaper, basically. That content gets old, whereas the content in a street magazine, that's content that would be good to read any time, right? With that.
Well, this is one of the best things about the magazines. You can buy it today, and you can read it in a year, and it's still as relative to the day you bought it.
I see.
And they have a very long table time. We have when people buy these magazines, they've normally bought it off somebody that they have seen every day. They've known them for maybe a couple of years. Maybe that month they're in the magazine, their face is on the front of the magazine, and they tend to have a very long lay time. They put them in their living room, and they kind of stay there. They're not really thrown away because they've paid quite a bit of money for it. I mean, 100 kroners for a magazine is quite a bit of money. But every time you do buy one of these magazines, the guy you're buying it off, you are helping him to be non-criminal.
Exactly. Giving them work.
So instead of them, absolutely. Instead of him breaking into your car or robbing your house, going out mugging somebody or robbing a shop, he's actually doing an honest job.
So how did you get started? I mean, you met the journalist that told you about this. What was the actual process? Because I know a lot of our listeners are going to want to know how you got basically from being homeless to being a magazine producer. What kind of, did you have to invest any money in it? Did you do it on a minimal budget? How did you structure and organize the thing from the beginning?
Well, the first person I met was Rebecca, a friend of mine. She was a diner who was having a failing company. And then it was Per Christian, another friend of mine who was a journalist. And then another guy called Stian, who was he'd been working with drug addicts. And we sat down and went through the whole situation of what we should do, how we could do it. And I took them to a friend of mine that I'd been going to the church. The local church has a soup kitchen, so which we actually use as a distribution point for the magazine. That's where the homeless can buy the magazine from. And we basically went out interviewing people. We got a photographer to come with us and take our pictures. And the church actually agreed. They didn't want to give us any money, of course, because, we were kind of rough people. So they agreed to actually pay for the production of the first 10,000 magazines. So we got the magazine together through the help of a friend who could do the computer work, and we put the bits together. The church jumped up and paid the bill for the first 10,000 magazines. Once they'd understood what the concept could do and the opportunities it could provide for people, they kind of jumped on the chance. And the 10,000 magazines, So it was a collective between what we call the Shudkins Be Mission, which is a church mission, and I think the direct translation would be. And they paid for the first 10,000. We went out and basically actively searched out people on the street and said, "Look, mate, do you want a job? You must be sick to sitting." We have ex-prostitutes who sell the magazines. We have all the social groups that are suffering, single mothers, the socially rejected, people who can't hold down an ordinary job, because it's freedom. It's like I say, it's freedom in their own way. They can work their own hours. They can work where they want to. If they're creative, they can find a very good place to stand.
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent of teaching a man how to fish. If you give a man a fish, you only feed him for one day. If you teach a man how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And so what you've done with the street magazines, not only did you build a business as a magazine publisher, but you also provided employment for a lot of people that didn't have that employment before. You basically taught them to fish. You've taught them how to be independent and self-reliant to generate their own income by selling these magazines. So you started out as an entrepreneur, and you turned a whole bunch of homeless people into entrepreneurs as well. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I realised, well, thank you. But it was something that needed doing, and it was done for the right reasons. It wasn't done to make myself rich or to make myself famous. It was done because, if there'd been street magazines when I was young, maybe my mother wouldn't have to do the things that I'd seen her do. So there was a little bit of my own self-feeling of worth in there, because I felt pretty worthless myself, growing up a drunk and with bad parents. But the one thing I did understand from very young was that you can take a man off the streets, but it's very, very hard to take the streets out of the man.
Yes.
So when you're trying to employ somebody who has problems like this, you can't be a boss that stands over him, looking over his shoulder, telling him, "Come on, do more, do more, do more." Like we say, you can't push a piece of string across a room. You have to pull it. You have to let them work their own way into it at their own pace. I think you'd be very surprised at the work ethics a lot of the guys on the streets have, because all they want really is an opportunity.
I was going to say that. That's all they need is an opportunity. If they have the opportunity, then it's up to them if they want to take it or not. And not having that stand over their shoulder, they can use that opportunity the way they want, on the hours they want. And I think that gives them a sense of pride to be able to say, "Hey, this is my business. I'm going to sell these magazines." That's why I think it's really
That's quite
amazing.
right.
Anyway, we have to go to a short break. We got a few sponsors that we need to listen to, and then we'll be right back and talk more about these street magazines if you want to hold on for a few minutes.
Sure thing, Tom.
TheWonderMill.com, the best grain mills on the market, with the ability to mill several items that many grain mills will not. There are 2 grain mills to choose from. The Wonder Mill Electric. It's fast and gives you a vast variety of items it can grind. The Wonder Junior Hand Grain Mill can grind a wide variety of things that even some of the most expensive hand grain mills cannot, including oily grains, nuts, and seeds. Learn more about the most resourceful tool that you may ever own. See all the exciting things that Wonder Mill can do for you and what you eat at thewondermill.com.
Where can you find the best in food storage, water purification, heirloom seeds, medical, health, and emergency supplies? LifeReliance.com. What do Mountain House, Legacy Foods, Guardian, Wise Foods, and Relief Foods have in common? LifeReliance.com. Who has the lowest prices, special offers, and free consultation to help you develop an emergency preparedness plan that makes sense for your family? LifeReliance.com. Why would Life Reliance do all this? We are family, owned and operated. Let our family help you and your family be prepared. Visit us at lifereliance.com or call 520-425-9771.
Old Dr. Bones here, and I want to know that you're prepared to deal with injuries and illness in any disaster scenario. What would you do if modern medicine was no longer available? The second edition of the Survival Medicine Handbook is over 550 pages of how-to advice for the non-medical professional. Don't forget, Nurse Amy and I have a whole line of medical kits, suture stapling materials, instructional DVDs, and other items that'll help you keep it together even if things fall apart. Check us out at doomandbloom.net.
Welcome back, everyone. I have GlennDarrin Stewart on the air, calling in from Norway to talk to us about how he started publishing street magazines. He started out homeless and living on the streets, and then began interviewing other people on the streets, and use those stories and those people to help build a business publishing these street magazines. Anyway, GlennDarrin, I'm going to see if we got some questions in the chat room. Dave asks, how do people's attitudes different, or how do people's attitudes in different countries differ towards the homeless? So basically, how are homeless treated in England versus Germany versus some of the other countries you've been in Europe, and now in Norway? Are the homeless pretty much treated the same, or different countries treat them differently?
Well, most countries have some kind of programs that are supposed to help the people on the streets, but most of them are very ineffective. It's one of the things I found with Scandinavian countries, like 10 years ago when I first started the magazine, most of the people in the country didn't even know there was homeless. And to this day, I still meet people in Norway who say, there's no homeless here in Norway. So, yes, there is. There's over 7,000 to 10,000 registered homeless in Norway.
Wow.
It's, people are in shock. The medias do not really discuss this problem in a way that people see it. It's kept very hidden, very much so. Whereas in countries like Germany, there's a lot of camps. They live in the forest areas. Each country has its own little nuance. Like in the UK, you have a lot of what they call travellers, or they like to call themselves travellers. They have no social security numbers. They live in caravans, and they're basically living outside of society. But most of them that do this actually manage to survive by doing crimes.
Yes, that's unfortunate. It's pretty much the same here. I'm a truck driver. I go around the country, so I see several different cities and communities, and there'll be a lot of these, they call them tent cities. People establish their own little communities of tents where the homeless live, and it's a lot of the same way. They, if they're not getting food by begging or scrounging in the trash to look for food, they're doing crimes of some sort, or they're getting in from the shelters. But what I've noticed about a lot of the homeless is a lot of them really don't even take advantage of the social services that are available to them. They don't sleep in the shelters, a lot of them, because they don't like the curfews and the rules and everything. I've got a friend that he was homeless for a few months. He was a truck driver for a while, and he's kind of like me in the sense that he doesn't like following other people's rules. So he didn't last in the homeless shelter very long at all. That's why I became a truck driver myself. I mean, I've never been homeless, but when I got, my first few jobs, I really hated working for other people. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand having a boss over my shoulder. And so I've always been unemployed. I've never had a hard time finding a job. But I went from job to job to job and couldn't settle in because I didn't like people telling me what to do. Until I got into truck driving, I had that freedom of I'm by myself and I make my own schedule and I plan my own things. And then I went from that to becoming an owner-operator and having my own truck, which gave me even more. And every time I've gotten that more freedom, it's like another big weight lifted off of my shoulders. I'm an entrepreneur. I want to go out and call my own shot and make my own decisions. And I'm thinking that might be the problem with I'm not going to call it a problem, but a situation with a lot of the homeless is maybe they just don't like being told what to do, and maybe all they need is an opportunity like this that they can make money on their own. That's why I think this is a really awesome idea with the street magazine. I don't know if we have them in the United States. Maybe some cities do, but I think this is really an untapped market that people in the United States and all around the world could get into doing these kind of magazines to give those people an opportunity to build their own wealth and have their own business. A lot of business, a lot of jobs, you have to take the drug tests and the alcohol tests and follow a whole bunch of rules, and a lot of people don't want to do that. But if they got their own business, yeah, go ahead.
So this is such a sensitive subject in the eyes of many governments, that people are abusing drugs, people are abusing alcohol. But, I don't ask them what they spend their wages on. Will they go home and buy 10 bottles of wine and go and close their curtains? We're all doing the same things. We're just, the people on the streets, it's more obvious. Like you say, having someone kind of own you in a way, you feel like you're owned when you work for somebody else. And if it's not suitable enough, you get reprimanded, and you're generally owned by people. These people who are your bosses tend to be very incompetent in what they're doing, and put a lot of their effort and a lot of what is their responsibility down onto you, and you're the one who has to carry the responsibility for them. But they're the ones who are getting paid 5 times more.
Yes. No, I think
I do understand you.
Yeah, I think this is an awesome idea. Dave asked, what was the last magazine about, the last one you published?
Well, the last big seller we had was the Christmas book. We do 11 magazines throughout the year, and then at Christmas time, we actually launch a Christmas book, which is all about people from the streets. It's about how they've spent their Christmases. We have, I don't think there's a celebrity in Norway that hasn't been in this magazine. A lot of very famous people want to show that they care about people. They want to try and help society in a way, but the problem just is so big that they don't really know what to do or how to do it. So these magazines are a very good way for the wealthy, the politicians, and for entrepreneurs, and for quite simple people who are well off, to be able to give a little bit back. they can donate their time in an interview. We can use a few photos of them, and they can tell us about their own experiences. We've had quite a few Norwegian celebrities come clean about their own drug usage in the past. You know, the only way with the problem is to get the problem.
Are you there? I think you might be dropping out, GlennDarrin. Can you hear me?
Oh, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, I was. Your voice was cutting out just a little bit. But it sounds like you're there. No, I think that's great. What did you tell us? Can you tell us some of your biggest stories that you had? You sent me a couple of pictures. You said that the King of Norway really liked this idea.
Yeah.
Tell us something about these big stories that you've done.
Well, the King is actually the only one in the country who can subscribe to the magazine.
Really?
So he gets a magazine sent to the castle every month. He can't exactly walk down the street and go and pick one up, you see. So, But one of the funny stories about this was when the chief editor-in-chief and one of the guys off the street were going to interview the King. They went out and they jumped into a taxi and said to the taxi, "Take us to the castle, please." And he refused. He said, I can't drive up to the castle.
GlennDarrin, you there? I think you're dropping out again.
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize, everyone. I think we're losing the connection with GlennDarrin. Yeah, it's cutting in really bad. Maybe try this. Maybe try hanging up and calling right back in. Maybe that might.
Okay, I'll try that. 1 second.
Oh, there. I hear you now. Oh, yeah. I apologize, everyone. That was totally unexpected, but I'm surprised that we had the connection as good as it was, considering he's calling on Skype all the way from Norway. Hopefully we can bring him back in a minute. In the meantime, is there any questions that we have in the chat room that I can ask GlennDarrin when he gets back on? I think we had AJ wanted to ask about Brexit. I'll ask him about Brexit before the end of the show. Oh, looks like we have him back on. Okay.
Yeah, very good. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, yep, hear you real good, loud and clear. Okay, so you said we lost you when you were talking about he asked for the right to see the King. Then what happened after that?
Yeah, well, the taxi driver threw them out the cab.
Really?
Yeah, he just couldn't believe that. You know, a homeless guy off the street and a pretty regular-looking guy were actually going up to meet the King. And he refused to drive them.
So how did he get the interview with the King?
Well, that was organised through what we call the press organisation here in Norway. There's a thing called the professional press here in Norway. Each business has its own representative. The building business has a magazine. The doctors get their own magazine. It's kind of a professional thing. And they have a press organisation. It was through them that we actually, because apparently one of the prince had actually bought a magazine off the street, and he agreed to be in our Christmas birthday. So both the King and the Crown Prince have been in the magazines. But we have a football player here in Norway who was on one of our Christmas books too. And he actually came clean with the fact that he'd been using cocaine through most of his football career.
Oh wow! So in a way, it's almost like a social network.
Yes.
People that get interviewed can tell their stories and talk to the people of their own community about their lives.
Oh yes, oh yes. There's, I think what surprises us the most is the amount of resources that are actually available on the streets. You know, I've met those who are on the streets, I've met who are on the streets. There's a very, very wide range of people and many, many groups that are actually represented. You know, bad times can hit almost anybody, but I class myself as being lucky.
I think this is a really great concept. I think, when we get this podcast, obviously we're live right now, but this podcast going to be recorded, and I'll have it shared on my social media to our readers and our subscribers so that they can listen to this. So I'm sure a lot of people would be interested. Let's say, somebody here in the States, in a city somewhere, wants to start their own street magazine. What are some tips and advice you could give somebody on how to start their own magazine just like this?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you find good distribution. So you're going to have to cooperate with, soup kitchens, with doctor organisations that help the homeless. Anywhere that you find socially rejected people, they have to be able to go and buy a magazine somewhere for them to sell further. We have one distribution office in Oslo, but we also have distribution offices in Bergen, in Tromsø, in Trondheim, in Kristiansand. Most of the major cities in Norway have a little distribution office, whether it's through the Salvation Army, whether it's through the local soup kitchens or local hospices, places where people can sleep. A lot of these places also have a magazine sales.
So how many magazines a year do you sell?
Well, we just in Oslo, we sell about 50,000 a month in Oslo. And I think nationwide we sell maybe 120,000 magazines a month.
That's amazing.
Well, it kind of changed quite a bit for me too, because coming from the streets, it was things are very different for the people who are raised on the streets than compared to people who end up on the streets. If you end up on the streets, people tend to drink more, they tend to turn to drugs more often. Where us guys who are raised on the streets have seen this from such an early age that we tend to bypass a lot of the immediate feelings of distress that you get when you end up on the street. And when that happens to people, it's an unforgettable. Suddenly finding yourself from being a lawyer or a worker, and then suddenly finds themselves with nowhere to live, living on the streets. It started out probably as a small problem that just grew into a bigger problem because of the situation has just got worse. So don't give up out there. There is opportunities.
Hey, I think I may have lost connection. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. If anybody in the chat room, if you can hear me, say you're here, because I checking my dashboard here and it's saying this chat room hear me. I hope we both didn't get disconnected.
I hope not.
Oh, okay, they hear us. Okay, good. Yeah, for some reason my dashboard is saying that I'm not connected. There's a problem, but they can hear us in the chat room as well. Yeah, we got probably about 10 minutes left, but I think it's a really good concept, and I'd like to see that here in the States. I don't know if there's any places that have them already, but I think it'd be, a great idea to help get our own homeless off the streets, give them opportunities. Anything that, opportunities that the homeless could do and do on their own time, on their own schedule, with their own rules. So they, like here, they pick up the magazines, they go sell the magazines, and they're keeping half the profit. Simple as that. What kind of work ethic is required to sell a magazine? These are homeless people. They don't, maybe they don't have any experience doing this sort of work before. What do they need to do to be successful selling the magazine to others. GlennDarrin, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, so
We go to centres, talk to them. We go to local businesses, speak to them, and just try and arrange places where they can sell. So we try and establish the sales points for them to start with. I mean, one of the big shopping centres in Oslo, there's 8 sellers who work from the shopping centre at the different entrances to the shopping centre, and they work in shifts. One does 2 hours, and then he's relieved by somebody else who works 2 hours.
So what do they do? Do they have like a little kiosk or a table, or do they just have a stack of magazines and sell them to the people that pass by?
Yeah, we just give them a bag with the magazine's name on, and they stand there holding the magazine, pleasantly asking past, would you like to help the homeless? Would you like to help to solve crime?
No, it's interesting. So basically the businesses in different locations say, yeah, you can sell your magazines here, and they just let them do that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, they understand that the guy standing outside his shop selling a magazine used to be the guy who was robbing him.
Exactly. That's that's a good point there. So now that person has a job and taking care of themselves, and that business owner no longer has to worry about that guy robbing him.
Well, it's one less to rob him anyway. But what we look at it as is giving back dignity, giving the people the power back to run their own lives, which is one of the first steps to being drug-free. You know,
exactly.
how they use their money is not a question I ask. But once you've given that power back to people, you'd be amazed what they can do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get caught up in drugs and alcohol because they lost the life they had before, and they don't know where to go or what to do, and they're just basically self-medicating to forget about those problems. Because like you said, people growing up are less likely to get caught up in that stuff. It's mostly the people who already were doing well and then became homeless end up caught up in that. That makes a lot of sense. So if you give them another opportunity where they can pick themselves back up, I can see where that would empower a lot of people that are addicted to drugs or alcohol to say, hey, I'm finally getting my life back together. Maybe I need to quit this.
Yeah, help to self-help.
Yes, no, that's great. So you said that I'm assuming Norway has extremely high, the cost of everything that you mentioned. But you'd mentioned that the Norwegian government doesn't charge tax for these people to sell the magazines. That's interesting.
That's quite correct. I think that the state actually makes their money by the fact that if you take 10 people who used to go in prison 2 or 3 times a year for a few months here and a few months there for stealing a salad, the savings on the prison costs are ridiculously high. So they see this as a social project, and that these guys should not pay income tax on this project. So that money just goes straight in their back pockets. So long as they don't have to be taken care of by the state, I think they're pretty happy.
We got a question from one of our guests in the chat room. Says, do you have to pay a fee for this opportunity? So I know the publisher is making money on this. You said that the vendors get 50% of the money they make. Do they have to buy the magazines up front, or do they go out and sell the magazines and then come pay?
Well, this is what we do. When people register with us, we give them 5 magazines to start. As part of the profit sharing, as part of in this, when each month comes, depending on what they've sold throughout that month, they get a few extra magazines to start their month with.
Okay. So you give them
we
a first
also
few to start, then they come back and then they buy more with the money they
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we also have a fund where when people donate money to us, if someone donates $20 to us, that goes into magazines. So that when people come to us, if they don't have start money for the day, they can get the first magazine for free.
I see. That's great. So anybody wanting to start out can literally start out at the very bottom with no investment.
Absolutely. And like I say, all new registered people come to us. They get 5 magazines.
I think we're starting to lose you again, GlennDarrin. Are you still there?
I'm still here. I do pretty badly too.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Tom?
Yeah, I hear you. No, actually, I think we're quite fortunate that the connection has been this good, considering we're calling on Skype all the way from Norway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with these street magazines, we also have different projects throughout the year for people. One of the last projects we did was a music CD.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we took a lot of very famous Norwegian artists and we put them together with people on the streets. And the guy on the streets, they write songs, they do poems, they do, there's a lot of creativity amongst the disadvantaged, very much so. And we put all this together and produced it and actually made a gold-selling album. I mean, I was lucky enough myself.
That's interesting. So now that you've got basically this distribution channel set up with all these people, you don't have to do just magazines. You can do books. You can do CDs. Why not? Maybe even have people get together and do make a movie. Maybe that would be
yes. Oh, we've had documentaries made about the entire situation.
That's really interesting.
I kind of took a back seat in that because I'm a strong believer in let the professionals do their job. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a filmmaker. So I kind of take a back seat very much and let the professionals. That's what makes it successful, because the professionals do their job properly. If I tried to do it, it wouldn't work properly. So it's about finding the right people who have the right ideals to be able to work together to solve these problems. I actually explained this to one of your countrymen who I played on this CD with, a guy called Ken Stringfellow. He was at the time he was the pianist in REM.
Wow.
And during his visit to Oslo, we managed to get hold of him, and he played piano on 2 of the guy's songs, one of my own included.
Uh-huh.
So and it sold gold. We sold over 50,000 copies of that, and it was only available through the guys on the streets.
I think we're still live here, but I might not be able to. I think our producer dropped out. I think what happened was he lost connection.
Oh, okay.
And that's why I keep getting this notice popping up, because they did get a message from him to close out the show. So I think we're at the end of the show. Hopefully I can close this out all right. I do appreciate you coming on, GlennDarrin. I think this is a really good idea. Hopefully we're able to inspire some other people to start these in their own communities.
Adding the choice of a crispy chicken BLT to Wendy's 4 for $4 is the biggest thing since rappers trying to sing. I got me